Cyberpunk. I wanted to talk about Cyberpunk. This would be sort of a rambling, podcasty type review of it. I've talked a lot about my thoughts on it throughout all the different streams, but I thought I'll sort of try to bring most of them together into this format. When I think of a review of a game, I've really gone away from numbers. I think that numbers are kind of meaningless in terms of whether you should play a game, because it's gotten to the point, I was talking to a friend today, that it's really impossible to recommend a game to somebody unless you know exactly what kind of games they like. It was a lot easier when I first started playing games, because if you had a Nintendo, anybody could like Mario and Zelda. Maybe not Metroid, even though that was a great game. But see, even then, it's branching away. Now, there's a lot of great games, but I personally I shy away from, say, the Ubisoft type, open world, checklist kind of games, the busy work kind of games. You know, and I tend to like CRPGs and stuff with for me, it's all about meaningful decisions. How many meaningful decisions did I make? Whether that's with strategy, story, combat, even if it's just a small decision of like reflexes in Dark Souls. Do I attack or do I dodge? When do I dodge? So when you talk about a numbered scale for a game, I guess that makes sense for how well it was made, you know, but if it's a 9 out of 10 game in a genre you just really don't like, you probably have more fun playing that 7 out of 10 game that was ambitious in a genre you liked that struggled. Now, Cyberpunk is definitely, with all its problems and it being unfinished, as a polished product, you could give it, say, a 7 out of 10. That's being pretty generous. And so, on some systems, it ran pretty well. I ran it on a PS4 Pro, and I had multiple crashes. I'd say every time I played, it crashed at least one time, and sometimes more. And that's a bit of a bummer, and that can really disrupt your flow. And when you get on a motorcycle, all your clothes come off. When you look in a mirror, you don't have any hair. And it gets to the point where you're wondering, when anything happens in the game, is this a glitch or is this the game? Which can be positive and negative, but for the most part, it tends to just disrupt the experience. Now, on a vanilla Xbox or PS4, I think I heard that the frame rate was really bad. And I rarely had that. Maybe in some of the larger markets it struggled, but overall the performance was fine, and the glitches were more distracting than, say, game breaking. But when it comes to recommending it, I'd say that it's really trying to be an open world Ubisoft. It's taking a lot of inspiration from that. It's taking a lot of inspiration from Grand Theft Auto. And far less from Deus Ex than I thought, but a little bit from Deus Ex. And what really ended up being the issue with this game is that it was crushed by ambition. When you try to change what you've been doing with The Witcher and add guns and cars and verticality, put it in first person, that's a lot. The Witcher 3 barely held together. And it held together just enough in that sweet spot where the story and the atmosphere definitely compensated for, say, lackluster combat. And if you go a little bit further back, The Witcher 2, my friend was just playing that, Ink of the Dragon, he's on this channel. And he was saying the combat is almost unplayable in The Witcher 2. He was trying to hack his way through it just for the story, but he said things are happening where if you're above an enemy, you can't even hit them with a magic spell or something, or you can't attack them. So The Witcher 3 brought it together, and it was like pretty unchallenging combat, because all you really need to do is spam dodge, right? There's that thing. It's not a meaningful decision if you can just spam dodge forever and then interrupt that dodge with an attack and interrupt your attacks with the dodge. So it was very ambitious to go away from the simple combat of just Geralt to, we're going to have fisticuffs, mantis blades, that whip, all kinds of guns. We're going to have hacking, which ends up being its version of magic. It's very ambitious. we've all seen memes of the horse Roach in The Witcher really struggling to move, and I played The Witcher and The Witcher 3, and yeah, the horse play was fine, but it wasn't great. Now you're doing cars, multiple cars, and you need to have cars going across highway systems. You're getting traffic lights, tons of NPCs, and we're not just doing it on a flat plane. You can go up there, and there's jumping, and you need to be able to climb onto these things. And they tried to also do what Grand Theft Auto does, what Rockstar does, by having this big open world with driving and side stories. And side stories, everybody does side stories, but sort of like those moments that happen when you're in an open world. Because if you're just cruising around an open world, it's interesting in Cyberpunk because there's so much to look at. And what I was really impressed with it is that each area has a very distinct visual style where you could look at a screenshot, and once you played this game a bit, you'll recognize, like, that's sort of the downtown area. This is more the banking area. This is where this gang hangs out. And I was constantly amazed by that. And the level of detail in the areas. And the way everything felt handmade. In the way that Red Dead Redemption did. But see, that's the difference. Rockstar painstakingly made Red Dead Redemption 2 the biggest budget game that still feels like an indie handcrafted adventure. But there weren't skyscrapers in Red Dead. You had small, that was a weird squeak sound that just came out of me. You have these tiny buildings. It's modest. There's large swaths of just open plains, rolling hills, things you can sort of copy paste or don't take as much work to do. You don't have rushing cars everywhere. But what you do have in Red Dead is more things are happening to you. And you can make a meaningful choice. You can go up to somebody and you can have a positive response to them. You can or a negative one. That's a choice. And from that, you can have a situation play out. And little stories are happening all around you. Cyberpunk really lacked that, where it was a beautiful world to look at and experience. And I wish it was in VR. But there's nothing really to do with these people. You can go up to them and they'll say one line to you, and that's about it. And if you pull out your gun, they'll all, like a synchronized swimming team, duck down and duck for cover, get out of their cars and duck for cover, all in sync. So once you pull the thread of this beautiful tapestry, it just tends to all come tumbling down. So it's very impressive, but also a very fragile world to look at. Now, when I think of the gameplay, the combat was way better than I thought it was going to be. And because it is so RPG heavy, I forgive it a bit in terms of like having weight and feel. What I found was annoying about it is that when I started the game off, I started on hard and all the enemies were so spongy. I was hardly doing any damage. You shoot people in the head like 4 or 5 times. But because they went with this heavy RPG route, you got to put your points into getting more damage of a headshot. And look, I get the RPG element of, well, seasoned shooters know which part of the head to aim at, or like, I don't know how to compensate for people moving, and they're better at shooting them in the head. But I'm the one that's aiming, and I'm shooting that person in the head, and it's really lame when you're trying to sneak around somewhere. If you can't take somebody out with a quick headshot, what's the point of sneaking? So I found that their reliance on enemies being spongy really hurt the combat in that it made it a bit of a drag starting off. Eventually I got better weapons, went to melee, focused heavily on that, and at one point I had put it down to normal because I found like the enemies aren't acting any smarter when I went from difficult to normal. They just have more health. And that was it was just becoming a grind. But then once I went to normal, it felt okay. But then once I put all these points into my melee and got the better weapons, it became really easy, and combat just kind of became a thing you had to get through. Now, that would be fine if the melee was very interesting and if you could sort of dash around a bit more, or there was really more to do, but it's quite simple other than hold block, see some sort of dodgy animations and detection from the enemies coming at you with their attacks and then hitting them. looking at other people's reviews and video footage, it seems like if I would have went with the mantis blades, that would have given me that quickly move towards the enemy thing I was looking for. Because when everybody has a gun, it's all about closing space, and that could have been really fun. If you're kind of a glass cannon that can do a lot of damage, but you have to use cover and use interesting movement mechanics and like distraction techniques and all these things that just aren't there, because the game is trying to be so much that everything else too many things start feeling very shallow. And I guess you could do that with, say, the hacking. There were some cool ideas there, like turning enemies against each other or blinding them. But again, it felt like to me, with how much damage the enemies were taking, you had to pick a few options to get very good at. Otherwise, you were going to struggle. So I went mostly with melee, just everything into strength. And if I could do it again, I probably would have went maybe melee and hacking, and really dug into the hacking and tried to find more, and mantis blades is what I probably would have done, because I had just enough in shooting that I was able to. I got one heavy sniper rifle later on in the game, and I used that to try to take people out with one shot. But you could do that with the little guys. There are a lot of if they were considered sort of a stronger than usual enemy, if they were sort of the not the boss, but like the mid boss or whatever you would call it. If it's a stronger enemy, you would sneak up on them and you do the takedown, and they would just shrug you off, which is kind of annoying. Like, I get it. You don't want to be able to one shot or do a stealth takedown on the final boss of the game or any kind of boss in the game, but I mean, just like the head honcho of the gang sort of spoils the stealth aspect. And that's what I'm thinking when I think about the gameplay in this game. Okay, the combat is better than I thought, but not great. There's a little bit to do with the hacking, but what other gameplay is there? The stealth I thought was okay. It ended up at times being pretty easy. You can blind them pretty easy, but a lot of times I just kind of ran up and hit people. I didn't really feel a big need to be stealthy, unless I was trying to just have fun with it. And then other than that, the gameplay is the choices you make in the dialogue and in the story missions. And some of them do have some choice. There's a very, I won't spoil it, but there's a very, very surprisingly intense and surprisingly shocking side mission near the end of the game for me, involving a prisoner and a TV show. And I couldn't believe what they were doing. And actually, I had to make a decision that was a large, powerful decision. And I liked the idea of it. I didn't really agree with how it got me there. And it happened so fast that I didn't really care about the person involved. But I more just cared about, because, I mean, no matter who it is, this is something that you're either going to do or you're not going to do. So there's that one, the main story missions, and you've got these sort of side missions and these gigs. And first off, the map is crazy. There's way too much shit on the map. And like when a fight breaks out, it stays on the map forever until you go deal with it. They had this problem in The Witcher where as you would walk around, instead of discovering anything organically, things just pop up on the map. Here's a side quest over here. And it's like they're so terrified people are going to miss out on the quest that they force you over there. Hey, it's over here. So it's over here. And there's so many things and this is a big gripe I have with a lot of modern games, is that, for example, okay, my friend had this example in God of War. He goes into a room, all of a sudden it locks, poison starts coming in. He's excited. How am I going to get out of this? Before you can even have a thought of how to get out of it, the game points a big yellow arrow. Throw your axe and get out. Oh, that's cool. I wish I could have actually got to think about it. And this is in a lot of games where it's like, find the thing, and it's on your mini-map. Go towards that yellow thing and grab it. You can't even find something by yourself. So what it does is it stops you from looking at the screen, and it has you looking at mini-maps, and it has you not thinking about something. And then what happens is that you're so used to not thinking about anything, but about your decisions, that when it actually comes down to doing something meaningful, sometimes I've been so trained by the game that nothing matters, that I'll do something and realize, oh, that was actually an interesting decision. And I kind of wish I was a bit more prepared for it. But the games are training you not to think about that stuff. So that's where this game, I had enough of a good time in terms of sort of the overall gameplay loop and the variety of things to do, but the execution of it, because they were spread so thin, is where it sort of faltered. And the quality of the missions was very sort of hit or miss. There's a large quantity of them, and some of them I really, really enjoyed and had really good ideas. And some were quite handholdy or just sort of uninspired or felt undone. And of course, the game is huge. You have a huge team doing it. A team that was obviously rushed and mismanaged. And it's a miracle the game is in the state that it's in, judging by everything you've heard about it and seeing the problems. If you think if that's a big problem, how did you get all this other stuff to work? Some of the favorite times I had in the game were either the side missions or the gigs where you go to a place on a map, you get a call from a fixer. Now, apparently these fixers are in the game. Wouldn't it have been cool to meet them instead of just having them randomly call you? I like them calling you once you've met them would be nice. But it just seems like they call you up and it had me thinking, do I know this person? Because it really felt like in the beginning of the game, when you would meet a fixer, it's a big deal. So, anyways, eventually you get to know them just from talking to them on the radio, but I think they really could have made that more of the story. That would have been more interesting to me, because like to see their world and see where they are. That's the kind of lore. And as you're getting involved with them, and you could like negotiate and all this cool stuff. All the stuff you did with the big black guy earlier. Anyways, the fixer calls you up and they'll tell you, here's a person or an item. We need them killed or we need it recovered. They're in that building. And they just let you go. And because it's not a main mission, you're not constantly interrupted by characters talking or like cutscenes. And it's just up to you. Go into this hotel. Now you're learning, well, what kind of hotel is it? There's multiple ways to find out where the person is. Do you talk to the person at the front desk? Are you nice with them? Do you bribe them? Do you, hack into a computer? Do you just use brute strength? Do you talk to the janitor? Do you just kind of bang on everybody's door? And while you're doing that, you're learning about the lore of it in a interesting and meaningful way. You learn like, oh, this is how people live. This is how a hotel like this would exist. This is what these people would do here. I opened up the door, there's a bunch of robots in there. That happened to me a few times in this game where there'd just be these robots doing very human things. I always really liked them. That's probably something that's a part of the Cyberpunk intellectual property itself, maybe. Maybe that's sort of like one of the in-jokes there. But if it isn't and they came up with that on their own, I really, really liked that. It was a nice surprise, and it fit with the world. Now, those kind of missions I loved, and that's the kind of stuff I really liked in Deus Ex, is that sandbox, how are you going to do it, what kind of skills are you going to use, explore and take in the environment through gameplay and interacting with it. For me, games need to be interactive, and watching a lot of cutscenes and story, or just having somebody tell you which marker to go to is not interactive at all. So those I liked, and some of the main story ones I liked, but it was pretty hit or miss all over the place. Although I would say for the majority of the time it was done pretty well. Just a case of probably too much being watered down. Yeah, I'd say the majority of the missions I enjoyed, and some were very great and memorable. Now, the main story itself, I think it felt a bit rushed because they wanted to have the three different lifestyles, the corporate, the street, and the nomad. And they actually have three different introductions. I picked the nomad. You start off in the desert. The corporate people actually start off in the corporate world. I don't know where the street one starts off. And you can use those skills to provide different dialogue options. If you pick the corporate one, that's sort of like the renegade Mass Effect option. But you can use that if you're trying to break your way into a hotel or something. You know the protocol to talk to them in a certain way. And like, I saw some funny dialogue options that way. But it seems like that was a great idea, and then they had to sort of condense it. And it seemed like it just seemed like it didn't fit. As I was doing the Nomad mission and the way we meet Jackie and the way that they were interacting felt very off and very different. I went over to my last review, but it felt like those were from two different stories. And the way that we end up getting to know him, and then this whole montage sequence, the way that they are approaching the border, that stuff felt like it didn't really click, and you would probably need more time to be that ambitious with the story. I thought it was just going to be choose your background. Every once in a while, you're going to have a lore flavor option in the dialogue. I didn't realize it was going to start off differently, and that seemed to cause a bit of an issue. Like, overall, the way it all comes together is wonky, but they get there. You want to rise up in Night City? I kind of wish they focused more on that. But it seems like you have the rise is mostly seen in the montage. And it would have been fun to experience a lot of that. But they decided to just fast forward through it. And now you and Jackie are buddies. Have the big moment with Jackie, and then it becomes about you and Johnny, which is a very popular cyberpunk trope. And we see it in Neuromancer about what is it like to be dead but be alive as a recording. And what would that feel like? Would that feel like you're immortal? Would that feel like you're a slave? What are the moral implications of that? And I wish they explored that a bit more. It seemed to be more about just Johnny's a cool rebel guy, as opposed to like what is the moral implication of this idea that this corporation is trying to do. I don't think they went into that. And maybe you're saying, hey man, I found all that stuff reading all the lore and you just rushed through the game. You're an idiot. So yeah, I could see your point. I do tend to play through games faster because I'm streaming, and I probably would have read a lot more of the lore if I wasn't. Like when I used to play Deus Ex games and just sit there blank-faced and not have the pressure of a camera. So that could be my problem. But I had heard some employees, allegedly, there was that leak on Reddit saying the Keanu Reeves thing kind of fell into their lap where they thought they needed a star, and they went for Keanu Reeves and basically changed the character to fit. And there were some other stories about some of the top brass rewriting a lot of it and not feeling it. And yeah, it's not totally corroborated, but I can understand why people would want anonymity, because it's their job and it's a competitive career and it's the company you work for. And might be if you're Polish, and this is probably the only Polish game company that's going to give you a big salary, right? But I mean, almost everything they alleged, based on how the game released and from playing it, that's not a stretch of the imagination. I like Keanu Reeves, and I think that's why they got him. He's a likable star. He's liked by the internet. He's liked by the type of people that are going to play Cyberpunk and talk about it online. But while I think he's a fantastic physical actor, and I recently watched The Matrix again, the way he moves and the way he reacts, the way he can play an everyman who's taking things in is good. But delivering long monologues and trying to be emotive or trying to be wild, he's not a wild guy. He's known for being wooden and deadpan, and which is fine if you're playing Bill and Ted and you're supposed to be kind of an airhead, or if you're playing Neo and you're supposed to be the audience and this is all happening to you and everything is like, what is that? But to be the image of sort of the bad boys, and I thought he did a fine job. And I enjoyed being around him. I just think they wrote him too much as like he was trying too hard to get his attitude across. And I just felt like that's not really the part of the story I find interesting, is not just like him being an old badass talking about the old days and his girlfriend who's 70 years old. And it was like a lot of reminiscing, and he did give you some insight, but a lot of times it just felt kind of, I don't know, it felt kind of one-sided. It felt like they were trying too hard to convey an attitude as opposed to having a lot more to say about it. And that's hard. When you're trying to write a game this big, this long, with his little moments coming in and out, and you got to make sure that all that is cohesive, it's probably the biggest challenge in any media. Because, God, I said that seriously. When you have a book or a visual show, like a movie or a TV series. Everything you write down in film is all there, second to second. But games are split up and splintered everywhere, especially with this, because it's all, you don't know what order people are going to do side missions in, or even the main missions. So it's really hard to have all that stuff work together in a cohesive theme. So to do that, you end up writing things. This is what's going to happen, is that a lot of the stuff you write for Johnny is going to sound the same because you're trying to get that same tone across. But then you lose the arc. So it's a huge challenge. And this game had a lot of challenges being developed. So for the story, I thought the story was, I'll give it a 7 out of 10. I think it was fairly strong. It was fairly successful. It had some very strong moments. There are some little moments here and there where you encounter, I think it's a Joy Boy. I wasn't even sure whether it was an artificial, like an android that you would have sex with. It was a guy. Or if it was what they do in Neuromancer, people that become prostitutes get something installed so they don't remember it. Like, that's an interesting concept. What's that like? If you don't remember it, did it really happen? Do you feel guilty about it? Do you feel anything about it? Do those things come back? You know? What if anybody could get something like that and you were a murderer, but you didn't remember it and somebody else controlled you? Is it your fault? It was your body. You made the decision to go under. Anyways, these are all the interesting ideas of cyberpunk and science fiction. And I'm always more personally interested in things that cover how people feel and how it affects them, because you can relate to that as a human. And you have all the interesting lore stuff in the story, but balancing all that together, I admit, that's a huge challenge in this kind of a game, a bigger challenge. So overall, I'd say the story was somewhat successful. Didn't really blow me away. Some parts were really strong, and others just did the job. Overall, if you can play the game on a really good PC, or maybe cloud gaming would be a good way to go, or on a PS4 Pro or PS5 or a stronger Xbox, and maybe wait a little longer, and you don't mind the modern presentation of Ubisoft open world and Grand Theft Auto without the quality and quantity of those. If you're looking for a little bit of everything and you like sci-fi and you like cyberpunk and some decent RPG mechanics, I think that there's a lot to like here. There's a lot of everything. There's a lot to like. There's a lot to be annoyed with. But yeah, I'd give it, okay, if we want to give it a number, I'll give it a 7 out of 10. 7 out of 10. Because at least it tried some different things. And I really appreciate that. And it also did some incredibly generic things. So I don't really appreciate that part. But overall, I'd say it's a messy, interesting, but fun world that is overly ambitious, but worth a play. And in a perfect world would have been a 15-hour streamlined virtual reality experience that did away with, oh my god, if it was all virtual reality and I was all like ducking and shooting and melee in virtual reality and driving in virtual reality and seeing all these crazy things in VR, cyber sex, and just taking in the world and just cut it way down. Don't even have you drive, just have you get in cars. You were always taking a cab and you look out the window and everything's on rails. You don't have to worry about the physics. I think it would have been able to solve a lot of the problems, but that would be probably the biggest risk of all for them to go against a more pure traditional gameplay style like they've made their name with Witcher. So overall, yeah, those are my thoughts on it. What were yours? Bye.